right, so we have talked a lot about the process for getting to know our current audience and trying to evaluate what the overall audience strategy is in my newsroom or my organization, and where does my role fit within that strategy. And also thinking about how can we develop strategies that go beyond just thinking about getting as many people as possible to read the thing, to thinking about who we're trying to engage and how we're going to build lasting relationships with our readers, and how ultimately we're going to be providing value for them, and how we can also derive value from those relationships, whatever the case of your business model may be. So to get started with the actual audience mapping process, we are going to get into the audience map worksheets. You can find that template in the course platform links, and in the information about this module, it'll be there too. The first part of that 4-part audience map process is all about declaring your purpose. If you reside in editorial, that might be, and this is something that I sometimes ask our editors to do, literally list 3 to 6 bullet points of what you would expect readers to learn from if it's a story, and you could make a story the basis for this entire audience map process if you want. It can be as simple as that. What are the things that my readers are going to learn here? What do I expect them to be tweeting after they read this story? Or if it's a project over time, a series, a new newsletter, whatever it is, what is it that you hope for your readers to learn? If you work in audience development already, you might want to think more specifically about a particular platform or a community that you're hoping to engage, either around a storytelling project or, let's say, Instagram. You know that there are a lot more people on Instagram and most of your energy is focused elsewhere. How can you really go about developing a content strategy for Instagram? Or let's say you're working with someone in editorial on a project on a particular topic and you want to adapt it for a particular platform or audience. And for product, think about an action that you are hoping for your readers or users to take. We do a lot of this on our team too. For instance, we talked about email earlier as being a really big priority for us. One example of that might be I want to increase the number of newsletter signups on my website. Period. It could be a really simple goal. Don't overthink it. Don't worry about if this is perfect or not, because you're going to be refining and revising this as we go. Just get started by setting down a goal or a list of takeaways, but what is it that you're trying to accomplish as an organization or as a reporter, editor, creator? I will also show you an example of what an audience map looks like. And we'll kind of revisit this week by week. Here is an audience map that I did for a new podcast that we launched this year called Point of Order. This podcast was meant to really, one of the goals that we set as an organization in our strategic planning process, which I'll talk about a little bit more in the next module, was really diversifying our audiences on multimedia platforms. We do a pretty good job on social. We've got a pretty strong newsletter strategy, but we have had the same podcast for many, many years, Tribcast. It's awesome. We want to experiment a little bit more in podcasts. So we thought about whether or not we could extend our legislative coverage. So this year, 2019, was our 86th Texas legislative session. In Texas, lawmakers meet every other year. So this year was a session year. And our goal was to create a weekly lean back podcast for interested observers of the Texas legislature. And then number 1, and you're going to notice that these headers are a little bit different than they are in your worksheet, and that's fine. But what I listed as the goal here for Point of Order was Point of Order will take listeners above the fray of incremental policymaking to examine the forces, people, and politics that shape the Texas legislative process. Evan Smith will introduce listeners to elected officials of both parties and other key members of the Capitol community, plus candidates and campaign pros, to examine the most consequential moments of the 86th Texas legislature. That wound up feeling more official because we got a lot of input from Evan and other stakeholders. Yours can literally be a bullet list. It doesn't need to be that fancy. But think of it kind of as a mission statement for your project or your story or your series. So that's all you really need to focus on doing for this week's homework, so to speak. The other thing that you need to remember to do, let's zoom back over here to our housekeeping notes. I already talked about making sure that you introduce yourself in the student lounge and in the Facebook group. We talked about where to put your questions. Please don't forget to take the class survey. You also have a bonus survey, totally optional, for if you have a social or analytics tool that you want to share with other people in the class, or you can obviously start by looking up the database that we have now and getting some help in downloading some of the data that you're looking for. But the last thing is, don't forget to take your quiz. You've got to take your quiz and participate in at least one of the discussion forums each week in order to get your course certification. One of the discussion forums is always going to be about sharing about your audience mapping process. I would encourage you to do that one at a minimum. And then there's usually going to be another question that kind of hits on some of the more nuanced stuff we talk about in the lecture. I think that's it for Module 1. I hope you are enjoying yourself so far. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you guys are going to be working on over the next 4 weeks as you get started on your audience maps.